From The Simpsons to Family Guy, there has been many a classic cartoon to become a shell of its former self, especially when compared to said show's golden age. But one of the more interesting examples of this would have to be Spongebob Squarepants, as its level of quality and ability to make audiences laugh has been something of a roller coaster for the fans that have stuck it out for the last 25 years. Because for a long time it looked like the show, just like many others of its kind, had become a lifeless zombie after a great would-be series finale in the Spongebob Squarepants movie, only for things to change with the release of the second movie, the Spongebob Movie, Sponge Out of Water. And today, I'd like to go over how the SpongeBob sequel arguably saved SpongeBob and kept it from falling into the depths of quality decline that so many others of its kind have fallen victim to. And obviously there will be spoilers ahead, so in case you've never seen Sponge Out of Water but would like to, you should probably come back to this video another day. You have been warned. Okay, so as I got into in my other video on Sponge Out of Water, which you can find a link in the description to, the SpongeBob sequel was one of the first things to truly feel like the classic cartoon in 10 years, which was only helped by the fact that it marked the return of the show's creator, Steven Hillenburg, for the first time since the original movie. And because of that, many elements of the cartoon that viewers had come to hate over the years were noticeably changed in the movie to feel more like they were in the show's golden years, and even had an effect on later episodes of the show. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. The point is, Sponge Out of Water took everything that fans had come to hate about the cartoon and fixed them about as well as it could. And one of the best examples of this would have to be in the characters themselves. Because SpongeBob, for instance, had devolved from an extremely kind-hearted simpleton always ready to do the right thing to a brain-dead idiot with obsessive tendencies. But here, his old characterization returns, actually doing justice to the character everybody fell in love with. Because not only is his IQ much more in line with the earlier seasons of the show, where he wasn't stupid so much as naive and too nice for his own good, but his sense of duty to always do what's right is put on full display when he stands up for Plankton because he knows he's innocent, even if he has nothing to gain and everything to lose from doing so. And throughout the rest of the movie, even as he watches everything he loves fall apart around him, he still maintains his optimistic demeanor and never stops trying to set things right, to the point that he's even willing to sacrifice himself if that's what it takes to save Bikini Bottom. That's the SpongeBob everybody knew from the earlier seasons, and that original characterization of him would continue into the actual show afterwards as well. And the same goes for all the other characters as well. Like, Mr. Krabs goes from being a money-obsessed, ungrateful jerk to the slightly cheap but nonetheless fair and surprisingly wise authority figure that he once was, as not only does he correctly predict the downfall of society without the Krabby Patty, but is also the first person to stick up for SpongeBob when there's finally evidence that he was telling the truth. And once again, that's much more in line with how Mr. Krabs was early on in the show, and was never depicted as the amoral cheapskate that he was before Sponge Out of Water again. And in the same vein, Squidward goes from being a constantly humiliated punching bag to a grouchy and irritable person who does ultimately have standards and will do what's right when push comes to shove, even getting to be a hero and keeping his good-looking abs no strings attached at the end, and making something resembling peace with SpongeBob. And in the early years of the show, that was a very important part of his characterization, because Squidward was usually a jerk who brought most of his problems on himself, but also had a nicer side that would occasionally come out and prove that he's not totally heartless and ultimately does appreciate SpongeBob in his own weird way. Now, sure, he does act like a jerk a few times in the movie, but that is still a fundamental aspect of his character. And most importantly, he ultimately does make up for it in the end. And not to mention, unlike in some of the later seasons of the show, his role as the straight man is also perfectly used. And there's also things like Sandy feeling a bit closer to how she originally was while still getting in on the crazy antics just as much as everybody else. And of course, there's Patrick. Because of all the characters to suffer a decline after the first movie, Patrick is often cited as one of the biggest offenders, going from a dim but well-meaning and loyal friend to a moronic, selfish jerk. And this movie also puts him much closer to who he originally was. And this is perhaps best shown in the opening, where he fights right alongside SpongeBob even though he doesn't actually work at the Krusty Krab, as even he points out. But his character realignment is to a lesser extent than the others, as the plot has him acting like a bit of a jerk at certain points due to how desperate things have become. But ultimately it's at least funny, unlike in the show, and he still does have his moments of genuine good. But in this case, it was more in the show after the fact that he was brought back to his much more well-meaning and less stupid characterization he had in the earlier seasons. But if we're going to talk about characters this movie fixed, there's one that must be given special mention, which is that of Plankton. Because after the first movie came out, the show started portraying him as more and more pathetic and incompetent, to the point that many started sympathizing with him over Mr. Krabs and found it impossible to take him seriously as a threat. But all of that changed in this movie. Because here, not only is Plankton made out to be very intelligent and a huge threat, to the point that it's only Burger Beard's direct intervention that causes him to initially lose, but more layers are added to his character than ever before. Because throughout most of the show and the first movie, Plankton is simply portrayed as a man so jealous of his business rival's success that it drives him to want to steal the formula that made him so successful so that he can become even more rich and powerful to get revenge on him. And we sometimes see that this desire for revenge and to be more successful than Mr. Krabs manifests itself in other ways too, such as hurting others for no reason, or even total domination as depicted in the movie. But here, we see a completely different side to Plankton, one that had never really been explored before. Because it's subtly implied that what drives him to do evil things is his cynical philosophy that everybody is out to get something and are only nice for their own personal gain. So from his perspective, there's no point in even trying to be nice or accept anybody's help, because it'll ultimately end with him getting hurt in one form or another. And because SpongeBob is the complete opposite of all of that, with his mere existence proving those beliefs wrong, the more time he's forced to spend with him, the more he starts to see that maybe there is something to such virtues as friendship, and that his ultimate quest for revenge is pointless compared to what he could have. And in the end, he does what many thought impossible by willingly giving Mr. Krabs back the formula, even though he has nothing to gain from it, because he's been shown by SpongeBob that friendship is more important and it does pay to do good for good's sake. As I noted before, this is a completely different side of Plankton that had never been touched on before. And the fact that the movie is able to sell his transformation from his normal nasty self into somebody willing to actually learn something is really impressive. Sure, it doesn't stop him from trying to steal the formula again at the end, but as he himself notes, he's just trying to get things back to normal. To put it all another way, this movie gets the characters behind SpongeBob Squarepants, and this caused a ripple effect that allowed them to become much closer to their original characterization in the earlier seasons after the movie. And as I just noted, what's done with SpongeBob and Plankton in particular is especially good considering what course the show had been on before that. But other than the characters, and as I briefly touched on with Patrick, another thing this movie gets right is the comedy. Because the more seasons that came out after the first movie, the less amusing it all became. But this movie brought back a lot of that signature SpongeBob humor again, and pretty funny results at that. And that's not even getting into the fact that, as I noted in the aforementioned video, the concept behind the movie itself is actually pretty different, all things considered. Because the idea of Bikini Bottom being pushed to its breaking point without Krabby Patties, and Plankton not being responsible for it, was completely uncharted territory for the show, and moreover is able to use that plot to its fullest advantage for all the character depth and absurdist comedy that it's worth. Because if there's one thing this movie most definitely achieves with flying colors, it's in the art of being really weird in a way only SpongeBob can be. And once again, these were all things that would spill over into the show afterwards as well. Because while there were some episodes to come out after the first movie that had some truly different or weird concepts, a lot of it felt either recycled or things you would quote expect from SpongeBob. But after the sequel came out, the show started experimenting a lot more and was able to bring some truly interesting ideas to the mix, as well as actually be pretty funny again. And as I noted before, the show arguably getting better did ultimately start with Sponge Out of Water, to the point that it can be said that the show was following the movie's lead in how to feel more like classic SpongeBob again. And for a time at least, it succeeded in that task marginally well. To put it simply, had it not been for Stephen Hillenburg's return in the Spongebob movie Sponge Out of Water, the changes that the show desperately needed would have probably never happened. It was a sign of what SpongeBob once was, and could be again, if to a lesser extent. And because those behind it actually learned from what Sponge Out of Water had done, it allowed the show to be better again after years of decline. Sure, maybe it couldn't reach the heights that it once had, but at least it was much better written and felt more like SpongeBob again. But unfortunately, it seems it wasn't to last, as after Steven Hillenburg's death, things started going downhill in a slightly different manner, culminating in the disastrous Sandy Cheeks movie, which is honestly the exact opposite of Sponge Out of Water in every way possible. For everything Sponge Out of Water gets right, the Sandy Cheeks movie gets dead wrong, especially when it comes to what it truly means to be SpongeBob. But I already covered that in another video, which you can also find a link in the description too, so I won't get into that here. The point is, it may not have lasted long, but if nothing else, at least Sponge Out of Water was able to prove that SpongeBob wasn't quite dead in the water yet, and that the show did ultimately have more to offer when steered in the right direction. Alright, I think that's everything I had to say on that. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that the Spongebob movie, Sponge Out of Water, helped save Spongebob Squarepants by getting everything right that the series up until that point had been getting wrong? Or do you think it's a bad movie that only reinforces how far SpongeBob has fallen since the show's golden age? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And as I always say, you don't have to agree with me or any opinions expressed in this video just because you watched it. You can feel any way you want to about both Sponge Out of Water and the decline of SpongeBob Squarepants, and if you think I had it all wrong, that is completely fine. And thank you all for watching. It is all really appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.